So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us today on this lovely Wednesday afternoon to join us in our second webinar in our series, Phenomena in Practice. Today is going to be all about classroom strategies that drive real science understanding. And while you've all been so kind to introduce yourselves in the chat, we'll go ahead and start introducing ourselves. So my name is Emily Miller. My pronouns are she, her. And prior to InterOrbit, I was a high school chemistry teacher for 10 years in Minnesota. I taught in our alternative learning program. I taught regular chem, honors chem, so lots of opportunities to teach a lot of different kids in a lot of different ways. I was also an NGNS pioneer and advocate within my science department. And I also had the pleasure of being a PLC lead. So I got to lead a lot of data-driven dialogue, which I love. And we're going to get into some data in this webinar. So I'm excited. Actually, our next webinar, just kidding. And now I have the pleasure of partnering with districts to help them implement InterOrbit. And speaking of chili earlier, I have like the blandest chili. I cannot handle spicy food. It's not that I don't enjoy it. My mouth just literally can't handle it. And from here, colleague Daniel is actually going to introduce himself. He's actually going to be monitoring the chat for us today and answering any of your questions that may come up while we're presenting. So Daniel, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Jackson. I have previously been a curriculum director while I was selecting different science curricula and assessment platforms similar to InterOrbit. And I've been a high school biology teacher and environmental science, physical science, and middle school teacher for 11 years in education. I taught at an international school in Colombia at the 8th grade level, and I was also a global educator and a Fulbright scholar in Morocco. Currently, I'm able to partner with school leaders and teachers new to InterOrbit. And regarding the spicy food, the spicier the better. There are some levels, especially when I went to Mexico City, realizing there's definitely some levels I haven't been introduced to, but I still enjoy the experience. It can be tough in the moment, but I do like spicy food.
My name is Julia Mota. I'm very respectful of some types of spicy food too. But I was a teacher and a tutor for elementary students in the Dominican Republic for about 4 years. And I've been supporting teachers and districts with their NGSS implementation now for the last 4 years. I've been able to partner and provide guidance to schools and districts implementing NGSS assessments in their instruction. And I actually like spicy Mexican food. To be honest, I am very respectful of Indian, Ethiopian spicy. They don't play. But I love the food. I just asked for the yogurt so I can put it on top of it, and it's not as spicy. And I'm glad to walk you through today about what we will be talking about. So some classroom strategies that drive real science understanding. Today, we will focus and you will learn 4 practical sense-making practices that use novel phenomena to give students daily low-stakes opportunities to build confidence, deepen understanding, and move beyond memorization. We'll be here for about 30 minutes or 35 minutes, maybe. We're going to go over what is InterOrbit as we always do. Then we're going to define sense-making practice, and then we're going to go over sense-making practice activities. Emily's going to talk about questions of the day, SCP practice problems, science talks, and phenomena transfer stations. And then we're going to wrap up our webinar. Cool. Now, phenomenal is what this webinar is going to be. Phenomenal. Let's dive into our content today. And first, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about what is InterOrbit. And at its core, InterOrbit provides high-integrity, 3-dimensional NGSS assessments that give you meaningful and actionable student data. So we'd start with phenomena that anchor every assessment so that learning feels relevant and authentic, and students can make sense of novel scenarios. From there, our platform delivers thoughtfully designed 3-dimensional assessments that lead students to demonstrate what they know, how they think, not just what they memorized. And finally, educators and districts get powerful reports that surface 3-dimensional learning data, allowing to state tests, helping them make informed instructional decisions and track NGSS proficiency. InterOrbit also makes the NGSS accessible for both you and your students through innovative approaches to sense-making. So with our scaffolded 1-dimensional, 2-dimensional, and 3-dimensional questions, and we'll talk more about that later, educators can design any type of assessment for their classroom or data needs. And additionally, InterOrbit is continuously adding more ways to help educators to turn assessment data into action. And then finally, we empower science educators with guidance, supporting resources, and professional development to help you reach your NGSS goals. And as NGSS assessment leaders, we share best practices through free webinars like this one, personalized account support, and professional development that help build a strong foundational understanding of 3-dimensional assessment. Now, let's dive into the meat of our webinar, and let's define what sense-making practice is. So sense-making occurs when students connect what they already know, their prior knowledge, their skills, their experiences, to grapple with something new. And that something new is usually a phenomena or a problem that they've never seen before, which introduces a level of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is key because it pushes students to ask questions, test ideas, and build meaning. So to qualify as true sense-making, there are 3 key ingredients that we want to see in questions. First, a novel phenomena. So something that is authentic and unfamiliar to the students. We also want to see the integration of all 3 dimensions, the DCI, the SCP, and the cross-cutting concept, and the real struggle with uncertainty so that students don't immediately know the answer. And that's okay, because that is where the learning and the sense-making lives at the end of the day. Now, it is important for students to be able to experience novel phenomena throughout a whole unit, because many times students only experience one phenomena in a unit. Like we see here, this is an example taken from Open Syed about a maple tree and some syrup. So it looks like students are learning science in this scenario. Many times students are just memorizing that one phenomena. And then when we talk about agave plants in the desert, they're like, oh, we've never learned about that in class. So for students to really practice applying what they're learning to the world around them, which is at the end of the day, the goal of science education, we must give them multiple opportunities to make sense of that novel phenomena. That way, when they get practice and they start transferring, we as educators can assess true science understanding. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about what can we do in the classroom to actually foster those sense-making practices. And our 2 next webinars will focus on formative and summative assessments and how to incorporate phenomena on those. Now, when we talk about implementing 3D assessments, we know it's not a one-size-fits-all journey. And that's why at InnoOrbit, we support educators with 3 different tailored pathways, or what we call assessment orbits, designed to help us build towards full NGSS proficiency, no matter where our team is starting. Today, we're zooming out a bit and focusing on sense-making practice, which is a powerful entry for introducing students to 3-dimensional thinking without the pressure of scoring or grading in a formal assessment. And these practices are designed to help students make sense of new phenomena while giving teachers a low-stakes way to observe student thinking and spark discussion. So if your team is just starting with NGSS assessments, or they need flexibility or quick feedback in the moment, this might be the perfect orbit to start. And this is actually the first kind of step that we talk about, which is action. We want to start giving students opportunity to practice that transferring in the classroom so that they can actually later engage in formal assessment. Now, sense-making practice and taking a closer look at what that is, at its core are structured activities designed to help teachers meet specific instructional goals by guiding students to explore and discuss phenomena and 3-dimensional questions. They are really powerful because they're low stakes, as I said before, and they're flexible, giving teachers space to build their own comfort with facilitating and observing student sense-making without the pressure of formal assessment, and using novel phenomena. The overall goal is to help students to build resilience when making sense of complex ideas. So instead of shutting down when something's unfamiliar, they'll learn how to ask questions, collaborate with each other, and stay engaged with the process. So I want you to take a moment to reflect and share in the chat. How do you currently introduce novel phenomena in your setting? All right, so I see a lot of answers. So some of you use them to reinforce content. Some of you do themes, demos, and introducing it in the beginning to revise during lessons and in learning sequences. Oh, Mentos and Coke. I love that one. That was one of my favorites when I was in school. Well, cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Now, the sense-making practices that we're going to go into today and the activities in the classroom we're going to dive into are the question of the day. We're going to talk about SCP practice problems, science talks, and phenomena transfer stations. And just to go over some basic NGSS assessment terminology before we dive deeper into this, I want to take a moment specifically to talk about performance expectations. So unlike traditional standards that often focus on isolated facts or skills, a PE tells us what students should be able to do to demonstrate their understanding. And all PEs integrate 3 dimensions, the DCIs, the SCPs, and the cross-cutting concepts. And we can see in the example below how all 3 of these dimensions come together in one performance-based outcome, So students aren't really just recalling facts, they're making sense of novel phenomena and showing their thinking into action. And to truly actually meet a performance expectation, students need to answer questions that integrate all three dimensions of the MDSS. And we call these three-dimensional questions because they require students not just to know science, but to do the science and think like scientists. And actually getting students to that point takes intentional scaffolding. And that's where the one-dimensional and two-dimensional questions will come from. And Emily's going to talk a little bit more about those questions, but a one-dimensional question on its essence focuses on just one dimension, like content knowledge, like DCI only. A two-dimensional questions brings in two dimensions like content and practices or content and cross-cutting concepts. Finally, a three-dimensional questions integrate all three, requiring students to apply their knowledge, use scientific reasoning, and connect ideas across concepts. So using these progressions not only supports students in building deeper understanding, it also gives educators a clear pathway to develop sense-making skills over time with their students. And now, without further ado, let's actually dive into the strategies of our sense-making practice today. And I'm going to pass it over to Emily to start talking about question of the day.
Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you so much, everyone, for sharing all of your awesome ideas of how to incorporate novel phenomena within the classroom. So today we're going to show you 4 different activities that we've kind of thought about here at Inner Orbit. But obviously, as we can see from the participation in the chat, there are so many other ways to give students opportunities to grapple with that uncertainty and to transfer what they've learned to those unique situations. So the first one that I wanted to talk to you all about today is something that we've coined question of the day. So question of the day is when students are going to work on a new question every day from an inner orbit phenomena. And the idea with these questions is that they're actually going to slowly scaffold up in rigor in order to eventually get to that three-dimensional sense making, which is what we ultimately want students to feel comfortable answering. The goal here is to really establish a sense making routine. So this is an idea where you're giving students opportunities every single day to engage with a phenomena, start practicing answering questions and getting them more comfortable and more familiar with this concept of sense making. And what's nice about this one is it only takes a few minutes. This can look like a bell ringer at the beginning of the day, or it can look like an exit ticket before everybody leaves. But this is something that you can kind of work into your current schedule and routine to start incorporating that novel phenomena. If you were to use Inner Orbit to help you do this, the first thing you would want to do is select a focused performance expectation. So you would want to pick a PE or a standard that you're currently working on within the unit, or you might even want to pick one that you want to review that was from a former unit. If you want to help start getting students ready for something like the CAST that was mentioned in the chat, where they're going to be looking at a lot of different content areas from that whole grade level band, you can pick something like that, or you can pick something relevant to what you're currently talking about. Once you have that focused performance expectation in mind, then you can go on Inner Orbit and see all of the novel phenomena that we have available that is tied directly to that standard. So these 6 phenomena here are actually all linked to MSLS2-1. Once you actually go ahead and pick a phenomena that is interesting to you, then you can actually go ahead and build that 5-question assessment to do this question of the day routine. And the idea with this question of the day routine is that you're slowly scaffolding up the questions each day in rigor. So the first day you would ask a one-dimensional prior knowledge question. One-dimensional meaning it's just on the DCI, it's just in content, and prior knowledge meaning it's actually from an earlier grade level band. So the idea here would be, do students actually know what they should know before I got to teach them what they need to know? Did they bring over that elementary school facts and foundational knowledge? Then from there, you would level up to core content knowledge that is on grade level. Then you could layer in a cross-cutting concept 2-dimensional question. The next day, you could do a 2-dimensional SEP question. And then finally, you can throw a 3-dimensional question at them and see if they can then bring it all together. To give you an example of what this might look like. So again, we're looking at this standard MSLS2-1, and let's say we picked the Condor novel phenomena. On Monday, we might ask students that one-dimensional prior knowledge question about which of the following describes a healthy ecosystem. So just kind of going back and looking at this idea of, do we kind of understand just even the concept of an ecosystem and what makes one healthy. And then from there, we can go ahead and then dive into deeper grade level content knowledge. Then we can ask a question that's now layering in that CCC of cause and effect. Then the next day, we can layer in the SEP of analyzing and interpreting data. And then finally, at the last day, we can actually see, can students do all of this at once? So we can talk about relationships and ecosystems while analyzing and interpreting data, and looking at cause and effect mechanics. It's a lot, which is why incorporating some sense-making activity like this and making this a routine in your classroom, students are getting exposure to, one, the novel phenomena, in this case, condors, and two, they're getting exposure to different types of questions that could be asked about that novel phenomena. So that was the first activity that you can use to start doing some classroom activities with novel phenomena to help students with sense making. The next one we want to talk about is a little different, and it's called SCP practice problems. So our SCP practice problems on our site is where students are still exploring a novel phenomena, but they are just focusing on the SCP. And really the goal with this is to start getting some insights about students' science practice proficiency while still exposing them to novel phenomena. Because really at the end of the day, we want to be able to know if our students can transfer their knowledge to those new situations. And this won't take as much time. The idea here is we have found here at InterOrbit that the SCPs tend to be a common struggle or a common point of opportunity for a lot of our partners. It's something that we see that our students need more help and support with. And so one way is we've actually scaffolded these SCP questions down a level. And rather than incorporating the SCP with grade level content, we actually strip away that grade level content and we're just asking them a question just focused on the SCP to really see if they can build that skill individually before we layer on our grade level knowledge to then eventually work up to that three-dimensional sense-making question. These are really nice as maybe like a diagnostic before you dive into a particular unit or before even going into a particular like grade level or like a course. Or this can be nice before like a pre-lab, as a pre-lab activity or something to kind of gain an idea of how your students are doing before you actually dive into something where they're going to be using that SCP readily. So to show you an example of what this would actually look like, you would go onto InterOrbit and initially then you would focus a desired SCP that you want to do some practice with. So like developing and using models. Then from there, you can go into InterOrbit and see some SCP practice problem clusters that are still centered around novel phenomena. So we're not just asking students to read a graph or read a model, we're still having them trying to make sense of something new while practicing that SCP. Then while you're actually within that novel phenomena, if there's a question you like, you can go ahead and build it and add it to an assessment. So to show you an example of what this would look like, let's say we went ahead and picked the phenomena, why isn't fishing so simple? And again, we're focusing on this SCP of developing and using models. Notice that we have a few models that students will then be referencing and trying to answer questions about. And also, if you take some time to really look at these, there isn't necessarily any like grade level content knowledge necessary here. We're not asking them to talk about like the dynamics within the ecosystem. We're not asking them to know different words like producer or consumer or things like that. Really, we're kind of asking, can you look at a model and can you make sense of it in this case? So this is another way in order to give students classroom practice with sense making with a specific focus on the SCPs if that's something you feel your students need more support with. The next sense making practice activity I'm going to talk about here is actually one of my favorites, and it's called Science Talks. So Science Talks are essentially a facilitated discussion about a novel phenomena. This is where you and your students together as a group can explore questions and share ideas and start to build understanding together through collaborative sense making. This is really nice for students to get examples of sense making, either by the teacher modeling it for them or by listening to their peers try to make sense of the phenomena in real time in class as well. Now, this does take a little bit more time, so you would need to like dedicate maybe like a chunk of like a lesson or a day to this. But this is really nice if you're like in the middle of a unit and you want to start incorporating that novel phenomena. So maybe you've been working on the anchoring phenomena for a while now. A science talk can be a great way to first initially branch away from that anchoring phenomena and start getting students comfortable with exploring something they haven't yet seen before, because you are there facilitating a discussion and helping guide them through it. So what this would look like is maybe rather than focusing on a performance expectation, maybe you actually want to look at a particular unit. So at InterOrbit, we've created a few different curriculum alignment guides on our site. So we know that there's a lot of other curriculum out there. These are just some of the ones that we hear the most often here at InterOrbit as a curriculum that our partners are using. So let's say you are using OpenSciEd currently. You could go ahead and click on the OpenSciEd tab. Let's say you're looking at high school and you're teaching chemistry and earth and space in high school. Once you click into that unit, you can then be exposed to all the different phenomena that we have for that unit. I'm just showing a little snapshot here just because I didn't want the little tiles to get too tiny. But throughout that entire unit, we have tons of different phenomena that you can then grab and pull to see which one fits in your current scope and sequence within the unit. Then from there, you can go ahead and build a short assessment with just a couple of questions. And it's really nice here to actually pull some 2D and 3D questions. If you pick some of those higher level, higher rigor questions, and then you can then model as the teacher how you would make sense of trying to answer that question, this could be a great way for students to start to understand how they could then tackle this on their own formally within an assessment. Some resources that we have available for you for these science talks is we actually have a facilitator's guide. So rather than just kind of like going in blind and throwing up a phenomenon being like, what do you think? We actually have some helpful tips and tricks for how you could facilitate this discussion, different questions you could ask, and also a place for you to record your notes and findings. So then you can kind of keep track of how this conversation went and what you might want to continue building on throughout the unit. One thing that can be really helpful is if you actually project the phenomena up on the board for the class, so you all have something that you can go ahead and reference. You can also have the phenomena on students' individual devices on Inner Orbit as well, but sometimes it's nice to have that larger one to refer to. You can then also have students follow along, and then you can record your observations in the template so you've got something to kind of keep track of as you move forward. Now, I mentioned we have so much phenomena on our site, and we actually serve grades 3 through 12. So if you are sitting here right now and you're like, this seems kind of interesting, or that phenomena looked kind of cool, or maybe I want to go ahead and try that out, Daniel is going to go ahead and drop an interest form in the chat right now. This interest form is essentially letting us know that you're interested in potentially piloting or trying out Inner Orbit. And then a member of our team will reach out to you ASAP, pretty much, and talk to you about what that process could look like and walk you through your next steps. So if this is something you're potentially interested in, you are not committing to anything, you're not like signing up or paying for anything. This is just letting us know this is something that you might want to look into or try, and we'll talk about next steps about what that would look like. Now, on to our last activity. So this is another one of my favorites called Phenomena Transfer Stations. So Phenomena Transfer Stations are actually where you're going to have groups of students rotate through different stations, and each station is actually going to have a different phenomena at the station. And the idea here is, again, for students to kind of collaboratively sense make, but also work together to answer questions about those different phenomena. This is really nice for students to be able to see how what they're learning in class can transfer to novel phenomena, but not just one novel phenomena, multiple novel phenomena, because you're having them work through different stations. Because this is a larger group activity with station rotations, this is going to take a little bit of longer time, but this can be a great opportunity to review at the end of the unit before a formal assessment. And it's also just another great way to explore new phenomena and discuss application and mastery as well. So what this would look like on Inner Orbit is, again, first you would pick that focused performance expectation. So you would pick one standard that you really want to focus on. And then from there, you would go onto Inner Orbit and select different novel phenomena. Now for this one, because they're going to be doing transfer stations, you're going to pick a couple different phenomena. So not just one, but you're going to pick a few that you want students to then experience all at once in one class period and compare. And then you're actually going to build multiple assessments for each phenomena. So students can answer different questions for different phenomena together as a group, all within the same period. So to give you a visual, station 1 would maybe have, why does this wax stop smelling so good? And so this phenomena would be at a station. There would be questions about this phenomena at the station. And then at a different station, there would be the phenomena, why does water disappear from this pot? And then at another station, there would be, how do these leaves leave the forest floor? And at another station, we would talk about, what does popcorn tell us about gaining weight? But all of these phenomena are all tied to 5 PS12. They're all tied to the same performance expectation. They're all about this idea of properties of matter, using mathematics and computational thinking, thinking of scale, proportion, and quantity, about how these atoms and molecules are moving around and interacting with one another. So this is a great opportunity to look at your students and say, hey guys, it doesn't matter if it's wax or popcorn or water. We can still transfer what we've learned to these new situations. So you're going to have one phenomena per station. And this can either be printed out or on devices. It kind of depends on your classroom flow and what you would want that to look like. And what would really be nice is then engaging in a classroom discussion afterwards and having students point out similarities and differences that they noticed. Was there something common that you noticed in a lot of these questions, even though these were different phenomena, to try to help guide them through that transfer? And that wraps up the 4 different sense-making practices that we wanted to share with you all. So Julia is going to go ahead and review all of the information that I shared, and then we'll talk about some next steps, and then we'll go ahead and call it a Wednesday.
Well, I did say we were going to be 35 minutes, not necessarily 30. So thank you, Emily, for passing it off to me. And I'm glad to wrap up this webinar just to go over some of the ideas that we already shared with you. This is kind of a cheat sheet for you to go back to in case you want to remember. So first, we went over question of the day, which is a great daily routine where students tackle 1 question each day, starting with 1-dimensional questions and then working their way up to 3-dimensional over time. We also have the SAP practice problems that focus only on the science and engineering practices, so no DCI, no cross-cutting concepts, and they're ideal for checking in if students can apply specific practices like modeling or data interpretation even before layering in content. We also have the science talks, which are classroom discussions centered around a phenomenon and a few guiding questions. And it's a great space for students to practice sense-making verbally and hear how others think through complex ideas. And finally, we have our transfer stations. And in this one, students rotate through multiple stations that show different phenomena tied to the same performance expectation. And it's very powerful for helping them apply what they know across different contexts. So I would love to know which of these activities you think could be helpful for you and your team. So if you want to drop those in the chat, we'd be happy to read to know what do you think you should be including in your instruction next, or if you're going to try any of these activities in your own classrooms. I do want to share with you that we are going to have additional webinars on formative assessments and summative assessments the next week and the week after. If you want to join us, please feel free to register and we'll see you there. And we really want to thank you for your presence here today. We really appreciate you coming here. I know some of you come to our webinars and really engage with our content, and we really appreciate that. If you're interested in piloting InnoOrbit, please, we're going to drop the link in the form. Please feel free to fill out this form. If you like this type of content, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at InnoOrbit NGSS or email us at inquiries@innoorbit.com. We really love doing these webinars and we love to see all of your thoughts. So thank you everyone for being here today. We really appreciate you and we'll see you in the next one.